So the state of Oregon is now being sued because of the law they just passed, which requires that you get a permit to purchase firearms, and also they have a ban on so-called large capacity magazines now. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think a permit to purchase and also a ban on magazines is clearly a violation of the Second Amendment, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. Also want to thank everybody who's recently subscribed to the channel. I mentioned a while back that one of my goals was to try to reach 400,000 subscribers before the end of the year. And you guys have absolutely crushed that. We are already at like 410,000 subscribers. So thank you for that. And if you're not currently subscribed, consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help the channel. And now hopefully maybe we can even reach 500,000 subscribers. How's it going, everyone? My name is Anthony Miranda. I am a licensed and practicing attorney in the state of California with an emphasis on Second Amendment rights. I've been part of Second Amendment litigation both at a state level and a national level while serving as a staff attorney with the Firearms Policy Coalition legal team. My goal with these videos is not to provide you any legal advice, but instead to give you greater insight into the inner workings of Second Amendment litigation and the battle for our right to keep and bear arms. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video we will be discussing a case which is currently challenging Oregon's Measure 114, which was recently voted on and is now passed into law. The measure, which was passed in the state of Oregon, creates a permit to purchase that Oregon residents must obtain to be able to purchase a firearm, and also this Measure 114 created a ban on so-called large capacity magazines. In response to this passing, the state of Oregon is now being sued in a case called the Oregon Firearms Federation, or the OFF, versus Brown. In this lawsuit, the plaintiffs are challenging this Measure 114 as a clear violation of the Second Amendment. Now, for those not familiar with what Oregon Measure 114 is and what it's doing, let me break this down real quick. Measure 114 is first a requirement and creates a requirement that anyone who wants to purchase a firearm within the state, they must obtain a permit to purchase. To obtain that permit to purchase, the resident will need to complete a safety training course, go through a background check, get fingerprinted, and also show a valid ID, and only after all of that will you then get a permit to purchase. Under Measure 114, it will now generally be unlawful after January 15th for anyone within the state to buy, sell, or transfer any firearms without having a permit to purchase and also going through that background check. Through this application process, you will need to also get a training certificate, so you will need to go to someone who is a certified instructor, some sort of course, do in-person training, go through all the requirements where you go through the legal training about firearms storage, federal and state level, other firearms laws as well, and then also do an in-person demonstration that you know how to safely handle firearms, and then also likely do a shooting requirement as well. If you are then granted your permit to purchase, that permit will be valid for 5 years, and then after that 5 years, you will need to renew the permit, and that will cost you $50 for that renewal. Now that you have that permit to purchase, you will now be required to actually provide that whenever you purchase any firearm. Now, under this measure, it's not illegal for you to own the guns you have right now without a permit, but a permit will be required if you want to purchase any firearms in the future. There are some other things included in the permit to purchase and this whole mechanism that is created, but that's just a general idea of what the permit to purchase actually does. However, Measure 114 did not stop by just creating a permit to purchase. The second significant thing that it did is it created a ban on so-called large capacity magazines. It bans the sale, purchase, transfer, and possession of any of these so-called large capacity magazines going forward. The measure prohibits the manufacture, importation, possession, use, purchase, sale, or otherwise transfer of magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds. This measure makes it a violation, and a violation of this law a Class A misdemeanor, which is punishable by 364 days in jail and or a fine of $6,250. So under Measure 114, there is a prospective ban on the purchase and possession of so-called large capacity magazines. Also, gun stores who have any of these magazines in their current inventory will have 180 days from January 15th to actually sell those magazines to out-of-state gun dealers, to other persons as well out of state, or to essentially destroy them. After the 180 days, these gun stores can only sell or transfer only newly manufactured magazines, which need to be marked with a special stamp that indicates that they are only good for military or law enforcement uses. So that's the general rundown of Oregon Measure 114 and what was voted into law and now is being challenged in this case. Like I said, that's not a comprehensive breakdown into all the nuances of the law. That's just a general overview and gives you a good idea of what's being challenged in this case. And again, like I said, in response to that, and like I anticipated, the state of Oregon has been sued immediately, and a preliminary injunction is now being sought and also a permanent injunction after the ultimate resolution of this case. And in response to that, the state of Oregon has now filed their response to the emergency request for a preliminary injunction. An emergency request for the preliminary injunction is seeking to stop Measure 114 from going into effect and essentially seeking to halt this while this case is currently being litigated and while the whole question of whether or not this is constitutional is actually reviewed by the courts. In their response, Oregon first argues that the magazines here in question are not arms and therefore they are not protected by the text of the Second Amendment. The state of Oregon actually states that large capacity magazines are also not protected because they are most useful for military applications rather than self-defense, and therefore are not protected as arms under the Second Amendment. Then they go on to cite the Ninth Circuit and the Ninth Circuit en banc panel, which stated that large capacity magazines provide a significant benefit to soldiers and criminals who want to use them, and that magazines really don't have any real benefit to civilians for lawful purposes. So in this statement by the state of Oregon, there are a ton of things that they actually get very, very wrong and that they're misrepresenting. First, just because an arm is useful in military service does not mean that it's not protected by the text of the Second Amendment. In fact, history and tradition of our nation points to the exact opposite. Those arms that are useful in military service are exactly the type of arms that the founders envisioned would in fact be protected by the text of the Second Amendment. Second, Oregon is citing the Ninth Circuit's en banc panel decision in the Duncan v. Bonta California magazine ban case. That decision and analysis is no longer valid whatsoever. It has in fact been vacated and remanded by the Supreme Court for reconsideration in light of their Bruen decision. That is because that decision by the en banc panel, which the state of Oregon is now citing, was clearly wrong and used the complete wrong type of analysis. Second, Oregon argues that this is not a violation since they are allowing people to keep and continue to use magazines that they currently own or purchased prior to this ban. Finally, the state of Oregon argues that the Supreme Court in Bruen stated that a shall issue permitting scheme could be lawful and therefore they can create this permitting scheme for the purchase of firearms. One of the critical distinctions is that Bruen dealt with concealed carry permits and a concealed carry permit scheme, not a permit to purchase. The conduct here in question is very different. Bruen dealt with the conduct of carrying out in public for self-defense, and this actually deals with the conduct of being able to even acquire a firearm for self-defense. Also, the state of Oregon fails to acknowledge that under Bruen, the Supreme Court also expressly stated that shall issue schemes could also be a violation if the restrictions are so burdensome that it prevents the conduct in question. And on top of all of that, under Bruen, the burden is still on the state of Oregon here, the government, to show that there is relevant history and tradition dating back to 1791 that demonstrates the constitutionality of a state permitting system for the purchase of firearms. The state of Oregon here in the response presents no evidence that's actually required under Bruen. Instead, they tried to say that here the permit to purchase is the same as a permit to carry, and therefore it's lawful. So that is where this case currently stands. There is a battle right now to get an emergency injunction to stop Measure 114 from going into effect. The state is arguing in response that the emergency injunction should not be granted because magazines are not arms protected by the text of the Second Amendment. Also, they are arguing that the permit to purchase here in question is directly in line with the Supreme Court's Bruen decision, although Bruen dealt with a permit to actually concealed carry, not a permit to purchase firearms. So that's a quick rundown of what's currently going on with the Oregon Measure 114 and the case challenging that new law which was voted into effect. So if we get any more information, if anything else develops, I will let you all know. Also, if you like this video and support the channel, and the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm or fuel algorithms with him. It adds fuel to his jet and signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. As always, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, and helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.